Let's discuss modifier placement errors and how they crop up on the SAT writing and language test. You'll see 1 to 2 of these on your SAT. Let's define a couple of things first. So modifiers are words or phrases that describe something. This is a category that includes adjectives and adverbs, but also includes phrases too. I'll give an example in a minute. Now, modifier placement is the principle that modifiers have to appear directly next to the nouns they describe. An example of a modifier placement error could look like this. Flashing white-blue lightning and ringing out with peals of thunder, the little rabbit sought shelter from the raging storm. Everything that comes before this comma here after thunder, this whole phrase, is actually describing rabbit right now. Now, logically, we know that rabbits do not emit lightning and thunder. The context of the sentence tells us that storm is the noun that the modifying phrase ought to be describing. But in order for the sentence to function logically, we need to rearrange this independent clause here so that we're no longer talking about some sort of impossible thunder bunny, as much fun as that sounds. We need to make sure that the modifier is next to the thing it describes. So a logical way to render this sentence is, flashing white-blue lightning and ringing out with peals of thunder, the storm raged as the little rabbit sought shelter. Right, so now everything that comes before this comma is now describing storm, which makes much more logical sense. What we just saw is one of the 3 kinds of modifier placement errors you're going to see on the test. The Thunder Bunny error is an example of something that can go wrong with an introductory modifying phrase. Right, that's everything from the word flashing to the word thunder. It's this introduction that modifies the thing that comes after it, which is, in the correct version, the storm. Another way to think of that is a descriptive phrase, a comma, and a noun. Another place you might find modifier placement errors is in a descriptive aside. The doctor prescribed penicillin, a woman in her late 40s, to combat the infection. Right, so we know that penicillin isn't a person, it's a medication. So a woman in her late 40s must describe the doctor. So in order to fix this error, let's just move where the descriptive aside goes within the sentence. So now it reads, the doctor, a woman in her late 40s, prescribed penicillin to combat the infection. The third kind of modifier placement error you're likely to see on the SAT writing and language exam is a relative clause placement error. Relative clauses begin with words like who or that or which, and like all modifiers, they have to immediately follow the noun they're describing. So here's an example of a relative clause placement error. The town near the radioactive waste facility where I was born has a population of 30,000. So here we've got a relative clause that begins with where I was born. Now, was the speaker in this sentence born in a radioactive waste facility? It seems relatively unlikely. It's more likely that they were born in the town they're talking about. So similar to what I did with the descriptive aside, we just want to grab hold of that entire relative clause and yank it earlier in the sentence so that it is again right next to the noun that it's describing. So now instead it reads, the town where I was born, near the radioactive waste facility, has a population of 30,000. Let's get to a worked example in a minute, but before we do, 2 quick tips. Top tip number 1, look out for possessive nouns. Struggling to adjust his bright yellow rain slicker, the fisherman's catch flopped on the deck as he steadied himself. You see, fisherman's here is being possessive. It's behaving like an adjective. And so that means that the first noun next to the introductory modifying phrase, struggling to adjust his bright yellow rain slicker, is actually catch, which is to say, a fish. And the second top tip is to focus on what you can change. On the test, only a portion of the sentence will be underlined for you to revise. So if the modifier isn't underlined, as it isn't in this case, you would move the noun. So this part is underlined, we'd have to find some option that makes the back part of the sentence about the fisherman rather than the fish. If the modifier isn't underlined, move the noun. If the noun isn't underlined, move the modifier. Now let's head over to the passage and take a look at question 22. So I'll read us in to get a little context. This is from a passage about the Romanian sculptor Constantine Brancusi, and a court case about whether or not his sculpture, Bird in Space, was art. After hearing a lineup of well-known famous art critics testify to the aesthetic value and originality of non-representational art like Bird in Space, the court's ruling was in favor of Brancusi. So, heeding my admonition from earlier, the presence of a possessive noun tips me off here, right? We've got the court's ruling. The first noun that comes after this comma isn't court, it's ruling. What we're saying is that the ruling heard from art critics, which doesn't make sense. It's the court that issued the ruling, and it's the court that heard the testimony of those art critics. And remember, the other top tip is to focus on only what can be changed. The modifier part is an underline, so we'll need to move the noun. So after hearing a lineup of critics testify, the court ruled in favor, or the court made a ruling in favor of Brancusi. Whatever the choice ends up being, the noun that's going to be modified is the court, because the court is the body that heard testimony. So let's look at the choices. A, no change. We know that's no good. We already identified the error. B, the ruling of the court was in favor of Brancusi. That's no good either. That's just sort of a longer way to say what choice A said. We're looking for the court to be the first noun, not the ruling. Choice C, the court ruled in favor of Brancusi. That's it. That's the one. That's our answer. D, Brancusi was the favorable receiver of the court's ruling. In addition to being a very awkward phrasing, it's also about the wrong people. This choice is about Brancusi and not the court. But the court issued the ruling, and the court was the body that heard the testimony. So let's review the strategy that I used. So I was clued into the modifier placement error because of the possessive noun that came after an introductory modifying phrase. All of that together tipped me off. Then I looked at which part of the sentence was underlined and used that to determine how I'd fix the error. Then it was a matter of finding the choice that best matched my prediction. The other choices are going to recreate that modifier placement error in some way. So once I know how to fix the sentence, I can just laser focus in on the choice that addresses it.